Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. My name is Don. We're here at DJP Media and today we're talking about processing your vocals. Alright, so for this video we're going to be using Ableton Live 11 that just came out, and I'm going to be talking about my approach towards processing vocals and how I use parallel effects. So I already have a project loaded up, and this is a song that I've been working on with an extremely talented vocalist called Joel, so let's give it a listen.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now. Make me feel the way you are. I'll keep you close.
Right, so that's a section of Joel singing along with the music. Let's have a listen to just his vocals.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now. Make me feel the way you want.
So you can hear his vocals along with the processing that I've done over here. And if I turn off the rack that I created, this is what his raw vocals sound like.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now.
So as you can tell, there's a big difference between the raw vocals that were recorded and the processing that I've done to it. Now keep in mind, even though we're going through some processing and how to process your vocals, this is not a way to make your vocals magically sound great. If you have a bad recording or your source audio is not good, then processing can only go so far. So before everything, make sure that your recordings and your source audio is the best quality you can get. Now the first thing I like to do before processing any sound is understanding the sonic characteristics of that sound. We're working on vocals right now, and vocals are very rich in harmonic content. For those of you who don't understand what harmonic content or harmonics are, it's simple. Harmonics are what makes sounds unique. They define the characteristics of a sound. It's why a guitar sounds like a guitar, a piano sounds like a piano, and even why our voices sound different than each other. Now, every sound has two very important properties. You have the fundamental frequency, which is followed by harmonic frequencies. The fundamental frequency is the core frequency of our sound, and that's followed by harmonics. These are frequencies above the fundamental, which reduce in amplitude. This is important to understand because just by looking at this, we now know that our fundamental frequencies have a higher amplitude than our harmonics, which means we can now use certain effects to bring up the volume or amplitude of those harmonics in order to bring out the characteristics of our sound. This is also commonly referred to as the body of the sound or the richness of the sound, and we're going to see how we can manipulate that section of our sound. So let's jump straight into it. I'm going to go ahead and delete my existing rack because we're going to build a new one. We'll open up the browser section, we'll go to our audio effects, and if you're used to 10, you'll notice that in 11, we now have all our audio effects categorized. So I'm first going to go into my dynamic section, and I'm going to choose a compressor. And let's go ahead and drag and drop this compressor onto the track. I'm going to change the view mode on the compressor. For those of you who don't know what a compressor does, it basically manipulates the dynamic range of a sound. And dynamic range is the difference between your low peaks and your high peaks. In this instance, we're looking at the high amplitude of our fundamental frequencies and the relatively lower amplitudes of our harmonic frequencies. Now that I have the compressor in the track, I'm just going to go ahead, select the compressor, and I'm going to hit Command G or Control G on Windows, and that puts my compressor into a rack. Now a rack will let me use my effects in parallel to each other. In parallel means one effect is not moving into another, so one effect is not affecting another. They're working in parallel and separate to each other. I can click on my chain list over here and I can see my chain. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and create a new chain. And I'm going to rename my chain with the compressor to comp for compressor. And I'm going to rename my empty chain as clean. So I'm just going to rename that to clean. Now on my compressed channel, I'm going to set up my compressor for hard compression. Hard compression basically means I have a lower threshold and an extremely high ratio. And what that's going to help me do is going to really help me align those peaks and make sure I don't have extremely high peaks or extremely low peaks. This also means I'm going to destroy my dynamic range, but I'm doing that on purpose. So let's go ahead and bring down my threshold and bring up my ratio. Let's also play the audio so we can have a reference.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now. Make me feel the way you are.
I'm also going to bring down my attack and my release.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now.
So there you go, I've set up hard compression on my compressor, and I can tell that it's hard compression because when I play,
Take a look.
I can see my reduction in the center, and you can tell that there's a large amount of reduction happening. Now, the reason why I have a compressed channel and a clean channel is because I'm going for something called parallel compression. Now, the idea of parallel compression is that you have one chain where you have extreme compression. Think of this as juice concentrate. You know, if you ever concentrate juice and you just want the extract of that juice, that's what we're doing on this compressed chain. We're just getting all that harmonically rich content as loud as possible. And we also have another chain which has no effects on it. So we maintain our dynamic range. And now what we can do is we can adjust the faders between these two and get the exact combination of harmonic content to the unprocessed content. So let's take a listen to this with and without and see what difference it made. So let's turn it off. Let's turn it on and play it again. So we can already hear some significant changes, and we can hear that our audio is becoming better. Our vocals is starting to sound a bit richer, but we can take this a step further. And we're going to use another version of parallel compression known as New York compression. Now, New York compression is the same thing as parallel compression, but we're going to add an EQ right before our compressor. So I'm going to go ahead, go into my audio effects. I'm going to go under EQ and filters, and I'm going to choose EQ8 from that section. I'm going to drag and drop it right before the compressor on my compressed chain. Now, the idea behind New York compression is simple. It's just an expansion on parallel compression. With parallel compression, we want to get as much harmonic information out there. What New York compression does is it adds an EQ before our compressor so we can remove more fundamental information and really get that concentrated harmonic sound out of what we're doing. Now, the great thing with EQ8 is I have a graph behind my frequency points, and when I play my sound, I can actually see the peaks of my sound. So let's see what happens. So we can see there is a band over here. If I move my second band and place it over here, this is generally where a lot of my high peak information is. So for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to be a little aggressive with this, and I'm going to affect a wide band of frequencies. When you're working on this, you might want to not be so aggressive. You want to narrow down the frequencies you're working on. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start reducing this frequency band and start removing some of that fundamental information. I'm also just going to go ahead and manipulate my Q and widen that band a bit more. And let's see what that sounds like. Let's turn off the EQ. I can hear there's a big difference between just those harmonics and the fundamentals. You can actually hear those harmonics coming out. It sounds very rich. It's too rich, but that's exactly what we want over here. We just want concentrated harmonic information on this channel. So now let's listen to the compressed channel again. And let's listen to the clean channel. Right, so now you can hear the difference between the two, and we can play both of them together. Take a look at adjust the mix between those layers.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about
Starting to sound good. I can also turn off the processing. Let's test it and see what it sounds like.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now.
And you can tell that with our processing right now, the vocals sound a lot more cleaner and a lot more smoother. Now, the next thing I like to do is add some time-based effects. Now, generally what people like to do is they like to add their effects in the same series. So you would have this rack that we just built with our effects on it, and after this rack, we would add our reverbs, our delays, our choruses, so on and so forth. But what I like to do is I like to add my time-based effects within the same rack and separate them by frequencies. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in a new chain. I'm going to go ahead and rename that to FX. I'm going to go ahead and drop in my first effect, which will be a delay. I'm going to choose the delay device and drop it into that chain. Now, once I do that, I'm going to create another group within this group. So I'm going to hit Command G or Control G and group that. And you'll notice I have a group within a group. So I have my effects chain within this group. And within that effects chain, I've created another group. And this is where I'm going to add my time-based effects or any effects that I want to use along with the sound. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to start separating these effects according to frequencies. And I'm going to do that by using EQ3. So before my delay, I'm just going to go ahead and find EQ3 in my EQ and drop it right before my delay. And in EQ3, you see we have our low frequencies, our mid frequencies, and our high frequencies. What I'm going to do over here is I'm going to turn off my low and high frequencies because I want my delay to work only on my mid frequencies. So let's solo my effects chain and see what that sounds like. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring down my feedback as well as my dry and wet. And now let's see how it sounds. Let's bring down my dry and wet a little bit more. Okay, so I'm happy with how this sounds right now. You can go ahead and modify this even more by changing your delay times, the delay type, and even changing your band of frequencies that you're working on. From here, the next thing I like to do is add some reverb. Now for my reverb, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to add my reverb after my delay, but I'm going to use another chain. So in my effects chain over here, I'm just going to add a new one. Let me go ahead and add a reverb. So that'll be under reverb and resonance. And before my reverb, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing and add another EQ3. And on this EQ3, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my lows and mids, and I'm going to have my reverb work only on my highs. Now, some of you who are used to parallel processing or processing in a series will probably ask me the question, well, in your reverb, you can actually, take out certain frequencies, and the same with delay, so why do it this way? Well, when you're working in a series, what happens is one processor affects another processor. And I don't want my reverb to work off of my delays or my delays to work off my reverb, which is why I'm having them run in parallel so they don't affect each other. So let's go ahead and listen to how it sounds now. So you can hear how this reverb is kind of adding an airiness to the highs of my track. So I'm just going to bring down that dry wet. I'll keep you close now. I'm just going to go ahead and bring down my feedback of my delay also. It's a bit too much. So I'm going to unsolo my effects chain and let's listen to the entire vocals and see what it sounds like. Take a look at what you've done. Now it sounds a bit powerful, the effects that we've added, but that's why we have volume control over our individual chains. So I can now bring down the volume of that effects chain. And you can set it to your desired effect and get it to work just the way you want. Now let's see how it sounds with the rest of the music.
Take a look at what you've done. Think about it now.
So this is at a good place for me now. The vocals aren't too harsh, they sound nice and smooth, and they have just the right amount of effects. When you're working on this, go crazy. Try different effects, maybe add a chorus, an echo, play around with your compressors and your EQs, and make it your own. Now remember, whenever you're working on a sound and processing it, try to understand the sonic characteristics of that sound first. That'll help you choose the right processes and device to get the exact effect that you want. Parallel processing and parallel compression is not just great for vocals, it's great for anything that's harmonically rich. Your synths, your pads, your strings, electric guitars, or anything you want to try it on. If you want to know more about this process or have any questions for me, make sure to join our community at djpaymedia.in, where you can interact with me, other trainers, and other members of the community. Learn more about music production or just how to be creative. I'll see you guys in the next one. Happy learning and be creativity.